Hello all. In this video, we're going to take a look at our first Python control structure. This is a for loop. It's a very simple loop. It lets us repeat our code over and over. And we're going to also take a look at the range function in Python, which lets us specify different sequences of numbers that we want to iterate over. And we'll see some other examples. There are multiple ways of using a for loop. So this will be the first structure that we've learned where the order in which instructions are performed is going to vary. Always before, when we wrote a script, it started at the top of the script and it just went one line after the other till it got to the bottom and then it stopped. Now, when you add a loop, you could have a series of lines where we repeat them over and over and over again before we go on to the things that come after. This is also going to introduce indentation as a part of our program. So up until now, you may only have realized that you couldn't indent lines in a normal script, the kind of script we've been writing. Indentation holds meaning for Python. So we need to indent in certain places, and in other places, we're not allowed to indent. All right, I'm going to go and shift to take a look at my notes, and then we will talk through what a for loop looks like, and then we'll do some examples and come back to look at the notes again later. So for loop is called a control structure. This just refers to structures in our program that allow us to control what gets executed, what instructions happen in what order. It's also a special construct that has, it's more than just a single line. It's not just an assignment to a variable. There's a lot going on, and it'll introduce us to some things that we'll see over and over again when we learn other control structures in Python. So at the very top of my notes here, I have a generic form for a for loop, a for statement, I guess it would be. So the things that are in the angled brackets, those are places where you would substitute specific examples. That's not what the code looks like. We don't use angled brackets in our actual code. I just wrote that this way here so that you could see that it's a placeholder where we're going to put a specific value later. So when you write a for loop, it starts with the keyword for. And then after that, you write some variable that you've chosen. This is called the loop variable because it's defined by the loop. It should be something that you have not used before or that at least doesn't have a value that you want to keep, because the loop is going to change the value of this variable over and over and over again. Then we have another keyword, in. I mentioned before, in has a lot of different uses in Python. This is a second use from one we've seen before. This is specific to the for loop. It just is a placeholder. It's just kind of syntax, like how we say the loop. After that, you see there is a sequence. Now remember what a sequence is. So far, we have seen strings and lists that are sequences. And you can put lists and strings into this last position in the main line of the for loop. You can also put a function called range that we'll use right away as well. At the end of the line, you have to put a colon. This is to tell Python this command is multiple lines. This is the end of the first defining line, but there will be lines after this. So you always end this line with a colon. And you'll see that with other control structures as well. We end the main defining line of the statement with a colon. After that line, you have to have at least one line that is indented. The typical indent is 4 spaces. If you are in an editor, it will typically do the indentation for you automatically. But what you do there is you put lines of code. Just like you would in a normal script, you put some lines of code in here. And what will happen is that those lines are what will be performed by the loop over and over and over again. They're the steps you want to have repeated. So the meaning here, I've written it out. The variable is What happens when you actually run this is that the variable, the loop variable, the first time through the loop, when you first get there, the variable is set to the value that's the first in the sequence. And then we perform the statements that are indented. And then we go back to the for loop line and we change the variable to hold the second value in the sequence. And then we perform the statements again. So for each value in the sequence, we do the statements that are indented with that variable bound to that particular value. So here is a simple example where I have the variable is the word color, and I have here a list containing red, blue, yellow, and green, 4 different colors. This loop would repeat 4 times, once for each value in the list. And color, the first time through the loop, color would be assigned the value red, and the second time through the loop, the value blue, and the third time yellow, and the next time green. Now, I'm going to go and do some examples before we go on any further in my notes. All right, now here we're taking a look at PyCharm, and I have a little example here that we're going to look through. So up here at the top, I just have defined a couple of lists. I have a list of numbers, and I have a list of words. And then I have some examples of for loops that we can take a look at. Each of these is going to print something each time through the loop. That's a good way to learn how the loops work, and you'll see that as we go along. So the first loop, our loop variable is num, N-U-M, and the sequence is this other variable, which is the number list. So this would act exactly the same as if I wrote for num in 35, 21, 86, 42, 90. These 2 lines mean exactly the same thing. I'm just taking advantage of the fact that I can define a variable to hold that list, and then I can use the variable here. It's just a little easier to type. And if your lists get really long, it's really convenient not to have all of the entire contents of the list written out right here. So this should loop through the number list. Num should be assigned to each of these values each time through the list. And then we're going to print the value of num and the value of num divided by 5. So the first time through, num should be 35. It should print 35 and 7. The next time through the loop, num will be 21, so it should print 21 and 4 point something. The next time through the loop, num is 86, and so forth. All right, I'm going to comment out the other loops I have here, because we'll come back to them. I just want to look at this loop, and we'll try running this code. All right, what you see here, we had a list that had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers in it. We printed 5 lines, but in order to do that, it only took us two lines to write. And if I made numList be 25 long, I still would only need those 2 lines to print all 25 values from the list. So you can see the values here, and then what I just show you can take that variable and manipulate it if you want. So we're dividing it by 5. One thing I can do, this is not a good idea. You don't want to change num too much, but there's nothing stopping you. So I could say num equals num minus 2. I just want to show you what happens when you do that. So num was set to 35. We changed it to 33, and then we printed the message. Notice that the next time through, it just reset num to 21. And then we subtracted 2 from it and got 19. So generally speaking, you want to leave a loop variable alone, except under certain very special circumstances. We'd rather have it be more predictable that num is going to be one of the values from the list that we've inputted. All right, I have another example here with a word list. So yes, word list up here has box, desk, tree, bird, flower, chair. I am not printing out the words here. I'm printing out the length of each word and then I'm printing the first 3 characters from the word. This is using string slicing, which was an earlier topic that we looked at. So I'm going to comment out these 2 lines, and then we'll run the file again. Okay, so it prints out the length of each one, 3, 4, 4, 4, 6, 5. That sounds about right. And it prints the first 3 characters: box, des, tre, ber, fla, and chair. Whatever those are. All right, so this is just to show you, it works on any kind of data. This variable will just take on the values in the list. I want to do one other example that I didn't have here before. So I'm going to write a for loop. And I'm going to put a string here because strings are sequences. So for ch in, this is my string, and I'm going to do this. Here I'm making a sample string. So if you think about this, from what we talked about before, I'm accessing the pieces of the string. The pieces of the string in this case are characters. So ch should be individual characters from this string. Should be t, and then h, and then I, and then s. And what I'm doing here, you notice I didn't use any commas. I'm using the plus operator, which we also learned works on strings. It does concatenation. So I'm concatenating an arrow pointing toward the character with the character itself. Notice I didn't put quotes on it because I want it to be the variable. You don't put quotes on variables, only on raw data. And then I have quote marks over here for another arrow. So let's just see what this does. So it's going to first print out the previous for loop, but then these are the printout output statements for this last loop that I've just written. THIS space IS space MY space STRING exclamation point. So indeed, if you put a string in as the sequence, then you can loop through the characters of that string. You can do lots of things with them. For instance, you could count how many characters in the string were the letter A, or does the letter Z exist in the string? Well, you can do that without writing your own loop, but yeah, that's the basic idea. Now I'm going to go back and talk about supposing that we want to repeat a certain number of times, and we don't really want to build a list that has values in it. We just want it to repeat. That's where we go start using the range function, and that's a super powerful way of writing for loops as well. And I have an example here in this code file, but we're going to go back and look at my notes first on this subject. All right, so suppose that I want to loop a set number of times. I could write a for loop that looks like this: for I in range 20. And notice this little icon over here. I don't know if you noticed it before. It's a copy. So I can actually copy this code bit, and I'll paste it into my code in a minute. I here is the loop variable, and we often, if we're just looping a certain number of times, we'll often use a loop variable like I, J, or K, sort of building on what mathematicians do. They often use I, J, and K as counting subscripts. So for I in range 20, what this is going to do is set up a loop that will repeat 20 times. For I in range 20. So I can do interesting things with this. I'm going to go back to PyCharm and let me just do the paste. Did the paste work? Yay, it did. For I in range 20. I can have an indented part that is not in any way related to the loop variable. I'm not printing the loop variable. I'm just doing something else. There's nothing wrong with that. The loop variable is there if you want to use it, but you don't have to use it inside the loop. So here we are just printing hello. I'm going to comment out the previous ones because that's going to get really long if we print everything out. And we'll just do this. So you can see here's hello. I've printed it out 20 times. I can easily print it out 2,000 times instead. There's a lot more output here. I'm not going to look at it all. It's just the same word over and over 2,000 times. So this is really convenient. And what I want to do is to pick apart what's actually happening here a little bit so that you understand what's happening. And then we'll look at some other examples as well. So we'll go back to Chrome because that's where I have a description and explanation written. So range is a function, and we can pass it different numbers of inputs. We can pass it one input or two inputs or three inputs, and they're interpreted somewhat differently depending on how many you put in. We're just going to talk about this one first. If you give range a single input, then what it does is it starts counting at 0 and it goes up to but not including the input that you gave it. It produces an iterator. It's a special kind of an object that, how do I want to describe it? It produces a sequence of numbers. So if you imagine it's a little ball, and every time you poke it, it spits out another number. And so what it does is, if you say for I in range 20, is it creates this little object, and it's going to print out 20 numbers. It's going to output 20 numbers, and then it's going to stop. The first number will be 0. It will go up to 19 then. So we're going to take a look at this with an example in just a moment. So it starts counting at 0, and it goes up to but not including the number that you gave it. This is a very parallel format to the string and list slicing that we talked about before. It's a common way to do this in a lot of programming languages, and Python is at least consistent here that we're talking about counting in numbers and we're starting with 0, so it treats this stopping point exactly the same way. And here it makes a lot of sense. We want to say for I in range 20, we would like that to mean repeat 20 times. It just happens to be that the values of I would be 0 through 19 rather than 1 through 20, because we start counting with 0 as computer scientists. All right, let's go back to Python and we'll take a look at an example. Oh, here I am in PyCharm. I had my for loop. I'm going to comment that one out, and we'll look at the last one. So here I wanted to just show an example where we have a loop variable I. It's a counter. We're looking at the range function. It's going to repeat 10 times. And here we are printing the value of I so you can see what it is, and showing you that you can use I and do things with it if you want. So here you can see the very first row that we print out, it starts with 0, and it goes up from there to 9. And if I change this to be the 20 that we had in our earlier example, it's again going to start with 0 and go up to 19. But the number of lines that it repeats, that have been printed, is 20. So that's where the up to but not including comes from. It's this idea that we're starting counting with 0. And so we give the value that's one past where we want to stop. All right, now let's talk about adding additional inputs. So switching back to Chrome for a moment, kind of going back and forth. So here I have a listing in the notes of the different inputs. Ooh, I have a typo here. I'll have to fix that. So we've talked about this one where it has one input. One input, it starts at 0, it goes up to but not including that input. You can give it two values. The first one should be less than the second, otherwise it doesn't produce any numbers at all. But it starts counting at the start number, and it goes up to but not including the stop number. So I'll show you an example of that, and then we'll come back and take a look at what happens when you add a step to this as well. It's interesting because it's analogous to what we had with the list and string slicing. All right, so here I have my for loop that was printing starting at 0, going up to 19. Maybe I only want it to start at 10 and go up to 20 instead. So I can say start at 10, go up to, but not including 20. And it does exactly that. It starts at 10, goes up. If I gave it numbers that were out of order, suppose I said start at 10 and go up to, but not including 5. I'm just curious if I'll get an error. I don't think I'll get an error. I think it just won't do anything. Yeah, it just didn't do anything. It skipped the loop entirely because there are no numbers in the range that I've given it, starting at 10 and going up to 5. Not even 10 is in that range. So it just skips the whole thing. All right, let's look at the last kind of a call to range. So I'll put this back to something that makes sense. I could go from 10 to 20, and that goes up sequentially one by one. The third input you can put in here is a step. So 20 is too small. Let's make it 50, and let's have it go up by 5s. So instead of counting upward one by one, we can do 10 to 50 by 5s, and that will jump from 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 to 30 and so forth. Notice it left out 50. It went to 45, and then once it added 5, it was at 50, and so it didn't do it. You have to kind of pay attention to that when you're working with skips. But here we can do any sort of integer range you want with any kind of skip you like. I'll show you a couple that are even more strange, perhaps. So suppose I do this. Let me do a simpler one. Let's do 10 down to 0. And I'll put in a -1. So I'm telling it start at 10, go to 0, and do that by subtracting 1 each time. There's nothing that says that the step size has to be positive. Now I can count downward as well as up. And I could also do this with steps that are bigger than just one step at a time. So now I'm going down by 2s. It'll just do the even numbers. So range is a very flexible function. If you want to experiment with it, go to the Python console. Oh, let's start a new console. Restart. And you can just see what it does. Range of 10, 0, 2. Notice what it printed was range 10, 0, 2. There should be a -2, but it didn't really matter. Range is a special class. It's a data type. It's a ball that spits out numbers when you put it in the right place. We can convert that to a list. If we want to, and it'll actually force it to spit out the numbers. So you can turn range objects into lists, but the most common thing that we do is stick them in as the sequence of a for loop and call it good from there. All right, we're going to stop there. We will continue in other videos to look at other patterns you can do with for loops. We can do nested for loops. I'll take a look at at least one example of that. And we can also use something called the accumulator pattern, which is an extremely powerful and common pattern to build up an answer over the iterations of a loop. And you'll see some examples of that in our next video. For now, I will say goodbye, and I will see you very soon.